I noticed the chair on a Tuesday, not because it was particularly special. It was the same standard issue plastic chair bolted to a desk that populated every classroom in Westbrook Academy, scratched and slightly uneven on its back left leg. But this chair was different for one very specific reason. It was next to Rick Prince, and it was empty. Now, you have to understand something about Rick Prince before I continue, because without understanding him, none of this makes any sense. Rick Prince was, by unanimous agreement, the scariest person at Westbrook Academy. Not scary in the way that bullies are scary. He didn't corner freshmen in hallways or steal lunch money or spray paint lockers. He was scary in a different, more fundamental way. He was scary the way a thunderstorm is scary, enormous, quiet before he wasn't, and radiating a kind of electric tension that made everyone around him unconsciously straighten their spines. He was tall, really tall, the kind of tall that makes a room feel smaller when he walks into it. His shoulders were broad, his jaw was sharp, and he had this permanent slight frown that sat on his face like it had been carved there by someone who'd run out of patience for human nonsense. His hair was dark and fell across his forehead in a way that I suspected he never once thought about but which somehow always looked deliberate. His eyes were dark too, almost black in most lighting, and they had this quality of seeing everything while appearing to look at nothing. He didn't talk much. When he did, people listened, not because he raised his voice but because he never did. The quiet of Rick Prince was more commanding than most people's shouting. He ate lunch alone. He sat in the back of every class. He wore the same kind of clothes, dark, fitted, nothing flashy, and he moved through the school like he was a current that everyone else unconsciously swam around. Nobody messed with Rick Prince. Not teachers who had a reputation for making students cry, not seniors who outweighed him, not even the principal, who I once personally witnessed hesitate before knocking on the door of a room Rick was sitting in alone, and somehow, impossibly. The chair next to him was empty, in a classroom of 32 students, in a school where every seat was precious real estate for social positioning. There was an empty chair next to the scariest boy in school. I found this out because I was late. I want to be very clear that I am never late. Brendan Hall, that's me, is a person who values punctuality above most virtues, who sets 3 alarms, who leaves 12 minutes early for everything. I was late that particular Tuesday in October because I had stopped to help Miss Ferreira carry a box of books upstairs, and Miss Ferreira walks at the speed of geological processes, and by the time I reached Mr. Calloway's advanced literature class, I was 4 minutes past the bell and 31 out of 32 seats were occupied. The 32nd seat was next to Rick Prince. I stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, I counted, doing the calculus of the situation. Mr. Calloway was already looking at me. 31 pairs of eyes had swiveled in my direction. I was already late. The only available seat was next to a person who once caused a junior to transfer schools simply by staring at him for too long in the parking lot. The junior claimed Rick hadn't done anything. He just stared. For 45 seconds. The junior had apparently decided that college prep could happen elsewhere. I walked to the chair. I sat down. Rick Prince did not look at me. He was looking at the front of the class, his notebook open, his pen in his hand, and I experienced the peculiar sensation of sitting next to a very large, very still piece of weather. Right, thank you for joining us, Mr. Hall, Mr. Calloway said, already moving on because there wasn't much else to do with me at this point. I opened my notebook. I wrote the date. I kept my elbow carefully on my own side of the shared desk surface. Rick Prince did not acknowledge my existence in any way for the entire 50-minute class period. I did not die. I counted that as a win. The strange thing, the first strange thing, happened at the end of class. I was packing up my bag, still operating in that careful mode where I was trying to take up as little spatial presence as possible, when I noticed that the person who had been sitting on the other side of Rick, a guy named Tommy Vance who I vaguely knew from sophomore English, was talking to Rick. Which was itself notable. People didn't usually initiate conversation with Rick Prince. Hey man, you want to swap seats? Tommy was saying, and he had the particular tone of someone who has been planning a casual question for several minutes and is now deploying it with studied nonchalance. I'm trying to get closer to the window. Rick looked at Tommy. Tommy's nonchalance flickered. No, Rick said, that was all. Just no. Not, "no thanks," or "I'm good," or any of the social lubricants that normally accompany a refusal. Just the single syllable, delivered in that low quiet voice, and then Rick was picking up his own bag and walking out of the classroom. Tommy stood there for a moment. Then he looked at me like I might have an explanation. I shrugged, because I genuinely didn't have one, and followed everyone else out the door. I didn't think about it again that day. I had enough things to think about: a history essay that was due Friday, a group project in chemistry that was going sideways, the lingering anxiety about whether I'd locked my locker properly. I was a person who thought about many things simultaneously, and Rick Prince was not supposed to be one of them. But the next Tuesday, I was on time. I walked into Mr. Calloway's class at 9:57, 3 minutes before the bell, and I looked at the seating arrangement out of habit and noticed that the chair next to Rick Prince was empty again. This was strange. Because Tommy Vance was sitting 2 rows forward, which meant he'd gotten his window seat after all, which meant someone had moved into his old chair at some point, which meant the chair next to Rick was empty, not because nobody had gotten there yet but because nobody was sitting in it. I looked around. The classroom was maybe half full at this point. Still filling up, and the chair that was conspicuously not filling up was the one I had sat in last Tuesday. I experienced a brief, absurd moment of wondering if people were leaving it for me. That was an insane thought and I dismissed it. I sat down in a different chair, closer to the front, next to a girl named Sophia who smiled when I sat down and asked if I'd done the reading. I had done the reading. We talked about it until the bell rang. I did not look over at Rick Prince until 15 minutes into class, when I happened to glance toward the back and noticed that the chair I had been sitting in last Tuesday was, in fact, still empty. I looked back at the board. I wrote down what Mr. Calloway was saying about narrative voice. I did not think anything of it. The third Tuesday is when it became a thing. I was on time, 3 minutes early again, and I walked into class and I was about to take the seat next to Sophia again, because it had been pleasant and comfortable and she always had highlighters to share. When I stopped, the chair next to Rick Prince was empty. Again, I looked around the room. It was early enough that there were still empty chairs scattered around, but for some reason my eyes kept coming back to that specific chair. The one I'd sat in on accident that first Tuesday. This was ridiculous. The chair wasn't saved for me. Rick Prince didn't save chairs for people. Rick Prince didn't notice people in any particular way, let alone in a way that would involve saving chairs. I went and sat next to Sophia. 2 minutes before the bell, the last few students filtered in and filled the remaining seats. Someone sat next to Sophia on the other side. The chair next to Rick Prince was the last one taken. A girl named Amara who'd clearly been held up somewhere slid into it at the last possible second with a breathless apology to Mr. Calloway. For the rest of that class I was very focused on the lecture, very focused, not at all thinking about the fact that the chair had been empty until the last possible moment. It was my friend Lucas who said it first. Lucas Obi was my best friend and had been since 7th grade, when we'd been assigned as lab partners and discovered simultaneously that we both thought Mr. Gardner's method of teaching photosynthesis was fundamentally flawed. We'd spent the rest of the period arguing about better pedagogical approaches with the kind of fervent intensity that only happens when you're 12 and you've just discovered that someone else finds the same niche things intensely interesting. Lucas was observant in the way that only people who spend a lot of time watching rather than participating tend to be. He noticed things. He catalogued them. He had an opinion about everything he noticed, and the opinions were usually correct in ways that were slightly annoying. We were eating lunch 3 weeks into the school year when he said, "Have you noticed that the seat next to Rick Prince in Calloway's class is always empty until you walk in?" I looked up from my sandwich. "That's not true. I have Calloway 4th period," Lucas said patiently, "and I sit in the back left corner. I have a clear line of sight to the back row where Rick Prince always sits. I have noticed that the seat next to him is consistently occupied only after you arrive. Someone else must be sitting there. When you're late or don't come, it stays empty. I checked last Thursday when you had that dentist appointment." He took a bite of his apple. "The whole class went by and no one sat there. I thought about this. That's probably just coincidence. People have habits. They sit in the same seats. The people who used to sit in that row have migrated forward over the past few weeks. There are now consistently no available seats anywhere in the class except next to Rick Prince. And yet, The moment you walk in, regardless of what time you arrive, that's the only seat available. I stared at Lucas. Lucas looked back at me with the serene expression of someone who has done the data analysis and is confident in their findings. That can't be right, I said. I mean, Lucas said, it could be completely coincidental. There's probably a mundane explanation, right? Rick Prince is probably not clearing that seat for you specifically. Obviously not, because that would be strange, deeply strange, and Rick Prince doesn't do strange things. Rick Prince doesn't do any things. He just exists and intimidates people. Lucas nodded slowly. Right. So it's definitely not that. We ate in silence for a moment. It's definitely not that, I said again, mostly to myself. Lucas smiled at his apple. I started paying attention after that, which was probably a mistake, because paying attention meant I started noticing things I wouldn't otherwise have noticed, and noticing things meant I started building a picture I wasn't sure I was ready to look at. The chair situation was real. I started arriving at different times, sometimes 10 minutes early. Sometimes sliding in right before the bell, and the pattern held. The seat next to Rick Prince was always the last one taken, always somehow available, regardless of when I arrived. Other students had settled into their regular spots across the rest of the room. The chair next to Rick Prince existed in a kind of suspended state, like a placeholder. This was either a remarkable coincidence or something else. I decided it was a remarkable coincidence and did nothing about it for another 2 weeks. Then the coffee incident happened. I should back up and explain that I drink coffee. Specifically, I drink one large coffee from the little cart outside the school's east entrance every morning. Because I take a city bus that arrives 40 minutes before the bell, and the coffee is the thing that makes that extra 40 minutes not terrible. The cart is run by a guy named Pete who has been there since before I started at Westbrook and who makes the coffee in the particular way that I like it, which is to say very hot and only slightly sweet. It was a Wednesday in November, and it was cold, and I was walking from the east entrance toward my first period class with my coffee and my bag in my general morning state of careful organization, when I turned a corner and walked directly into someone going the other direction. My coffee went sideways. There was a critical moment where it could have gone badly. The lid could have come off. The whole thing could have cascaded down onto me or the other person, but a hand appeared from somewhere and caught the cup, and I looked up from my near disaster to find that the hand belonged to Rick Prince. He had caught my coffee. He handed it back to me. We were standing about 18 inches apart, which was closer than I had ever stood to Rick Prince voluntarily, and up close he was different than I expected. His expression wasn't hard in the way I'd always read it from a distance, it was more like private. Like someone who was thinking something but had decided not to say it. Thank you, I said, because I had been raised by parents who insisted on thank yous. Rick nodded once. He walked away. I stood in the hallway for a moment, clutching my coffee, processing the fact that Rick Prince had saved my morning coffee from spilling with the kind of casual reflexive grace that suggested he was someone who was good at catching things. I walked to class. I thought about it all day. I thought about it, specifically, the way he'd handed the cup back to me. Not just holding it out but actually orienting it correctly, handle forward, like he'd thought. For a fraction of a second about the most efficient way for me to take it back. It was a small thing. An absurdly small thing. But it had the quality of attention in it, and attention from Rick Prince was not something I had any framework for. I told Lucas about it at lunch. Lucas ate his lunch. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what's interesting about that? I'm sure you'll tell me. There are 2 routes from the east entrance to your first period class. The route you usually take, which goes past the science wing, and the shorter route, which goes through the main corridor. You take the science wing route because you like to look at the tank of fish outside Dr. Patel's classroom." I stared at him. "How do you know that? I've walked with you to first period many times and I notice things." My point is, Rick Prince's first period is on the 2nd floor of the main building. His route from the east entrance would logically go through the main corridor. Which is not where he ran into you. I processed this. You're saying he was on the wrong route. I'm saying he was on an inefficient route for his destination. Yes, that could mean 100 different things. It could, yes. We looked at each other. It doesn't mean anything, I said. Agreed, said Lucas, in the tone he uses when he disagrees. I want to be honest about something. I wasn't indifferent to Rick Prince the way I was telling myself I was. Indifferent was the armor. Indifferent was the thing I'd been performing since I walked into that classroom in October and sat down next to him and spent 50 minutes very carefully not dying. Indifferent was easier than the alternative. Which was admitting that somewhere in those first few minutes of sitting next to him, something had shifted in the back of my mind in a way I hadn't given it permission to. The alternative involved thinking about things like the fact that he smelled like something clean and slightly woodsy, which I had noticed entirely against my will. Or the way he wrote in his notebook, small, neat, very fast, like the thoughts arrived whole and just needed to be transcribed. Or the fact that twice in that first class I'd felt his gaze move to me and slide away, like a flashlight that had swept across my face on its way to somewhere else. I noticed these things. I did not have a plan for what to do with them. The thing about Rick Prince was that he was legible in the way that scary things are legible. You understood the shape of the danger, even if you didn't understand the details. What I was not prepared for was the possibility that what I'd been reading as danger was something else. That the way he took up space was not aggression but presence. That the silence was not hostility but preference. That the looking and looking away was not disdain but something else, something I was going to need more data to define, and was not going to go looking for, except I did go looking for it. Not on purpose, but all roads in my head seemed to be leading somewhere in his direction. And I eventually stopped fighting the navigation. I started watching him in class. Not staring. I wasn't about to get caught staring at Rick Prince, because being caught would imply that the staring was happening, and I was committed to the position that it wasn't, but noticing, in the sidelong observational way that I had apparently learned from Lucas, what I noticed was this: he was bored. Not in a disengaged way, he took notes, he was clearly following the lectures, but in the way of someone for whom the class is running at the wrong speed. His pen would finish the important point Mr. Calloway was making and then hover above the page while Mr. Calloway elaborated. And the hovering had a quality of patience being maintained at some cost. I recognized this because it was something I experienced regularly, and the recognition had the disorienting quality of seeing your own reflection in an unexpected mirror. Also, he had a specific expression he made when he was writing something he found interesting, which was different from his default expression, which was the carved from stone thing. When something interested him, the frown softened in a particular way. It was subtle. I suspect most people had never been close enough or patient enough to notice it. I noticed it because I was sitting one chair away and because, as established, I had apparently started caring about things I wasn't supposed to be caring about. The second thing I noticed was that he read. Not just assigned reading. I noticed his bag sometimes had a second book in it, a personal one, and once I caught a glimpse of the cover when he shifted his bag on his shoulder in the hallway, and it was a novel I recognized because I'd read it the previous summer. It was not the kind of book that got assigned in school, and it was not the kind of book that anyone read casually. It was the kind of book that required commitment and a certain kind of mind. I had read it in 3 days, which my mother still talked about as a defining example of my tendency toward obsessive focus. I thought about saying something about the book. I thought about this for approximately 2 weeks. I did not say anything about the book. The library encounter changed things, which I recognize is the kind of sentence that makes it sound like I knew something was going to change, but I genuinely didn't see it coming, which is either a failure of self-awareness or a function of the fact that Rick Prince's behavior continued to defy all reasonable prediction models. I was in the library on a Thursday afternoon in late November, working on the history essay that had been hanging over my head for 2 weeks, when I became aware that someone had sat down across from me. I looked up. Rick Prince set down a stack of books and a notebook. He pulled out the chair. He sat down. He opened the notebook. He began to write. He did not look at me. The library had approximately 20 open tables and a variety of available chairs at each. He had sat down at mine. I looked back at my history essay. This was fine. The library was a shared space. People sat at tables other people were already using all the time. This was normal library behavior, not a notable event. I was deeply aware of his presence across the table in the way that you're aware of a sound that's just below audible range, not hearing it but feeling the frequency of it in your chest. I wrote 3 sentences of my history essay. After about 10 minutes of this extremely normal and unremarkable shared table situation, Rick reached across and slid a book toward me without looking up from his notebook. I looked at the book. Then I looked at him. He was still writing. I looked at the book again. It was a secondary source I'd been trying to find for my essay, a specific academic text on post-war economic restructuring that had apparently been checked out of the library repeatedly this term and that I had already requested twice via the hold system. I said, quietly, because this was a library. Where did you find this? Back shelf, he said. Reference section. It's not in the system as circulating, but there are copies in the reference shelves. I stared at him. He was looking at his notebook. How did you know I was looking for it? I asked. A pause. Then, you've had the same chapter open in your textbook for 20 minutes. The footnote on that chapter cites that source. I looked at my textbook. I looked at the footnote. I looked at Rick Prince. Rick Prince looked at his notebook. Thank you, I said. He nodded once, the same single nod from the coffee incident, and kept writing. I used the book for my essay. It was exactly the source I'd needed. My history essay ended up being one of the best things I wrote all term. I sat across from Rick Prince in the library for 2 more hours that afternoon, and at the end of those 2 hours, when we were both packing up to leave, he said without preamble, "You're in Callaway's Advanced Lit, right?" It was not really a question, but I treated it as one. Yeah, the Steinbeck essay. You argued that the authorial voice undermines the narrative distance. I had argued exactly that in a class discussion 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it was right. He zipped his bag and left. I stood next to the table for a moment, holding my own bag, processing the fact that Rick Prince had remembered a comment I made in class 2 weeks ago and had apparently thought about it enough to form an opinion. An agreeing opinion. I walked home at a speed that was probably faster than usual. Lucas texted me that evening. How was the library session? I didn't ask how he knew I'd been at the library. Lucas knew things. Fine, I typed, just fine. He found me a book I needed and told me my Steinbeck argument was right. There was a longer pause than usual. Then, Brendan, I'm just saying, don't say it. Okay. A minute passed. Brendan, Lucas, he's saving seats for you in Callaway's class. We don't know that, and now he's sitting across from you in the library and finding you books. It was just a book, Brendan, my dear friend, my brother of many years. Please, he likes you. I put my phone down. I picked it up. I put it down again. I picked it up. That is not a thing that is possible, I typed. Why not? I thought about this for a genuinely long time. Because he's Rick Prince, I finally wrote. Lucas sent back a single emoji, the one with the straight face, which was his equivalent of a very eloquent shrug. I put my phone down and stared at my ceiling for a while. If you are still watching, subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Now let's see what happens next. The problem with having a new framework for something is that you can't go back to the old one. Once Lucas had said it, he likes you, the word settled into my interpretive system like a key into a lock. And all the things that hadn't fit together before started quietly clicking into place: the chair, the coffee, the wrong hallway route, the library, the book. The comment about my essay. I was going to need to make a decision about what to do with this, which was not a comfortable realization because my instinct in situations that required courage was historically to wait them out and see if they resolved on their own. This was a deeply flawed strategy that Lucas had told me about many times, and in this particular situation it seemed especially dangerous because if I waited Rick Prince out, I was going to end up sitting next to him in Advanced Lit for the rest of the year and in the library twice a week, which had apparently become a thing that was happening. And in 17 years I was going to be telling my therapist about the year I spent in the proximity of someone who interested me profoundly and did nothing about it. I decided to do something about it. The decision came on a Friday evening and felt very clear in the moment. By Saturday morning it had become significantly less clear. By Saturday afternoon it had retreated behind a wall of extremely convincing reasons why doing something about it was actually a terrible idea. By Saturday evening I had talked myself back into doing something about it, because Lucas had called and spent 40 minutes patiently dismantling every reason I'd constructed. He's scary, I said. This was the last line of defense. He found you a library book, Lucas said. Scary people do not find you library books. He could be scary and nice about library books. Brendan, those things aren't mutually exclusive. Brendan, I need you to hear me. Rick Prince has rearranged the social architecture of a classroom for you for 2 months. He has gone out of his way to be in your path repeatedly. He complimented your academic argument. He found you a source. The only thing left for him to do is show up at your door with a handwritten sign. I thought about Rick Prince standing at my door with a handwritten sign. The thought was so absurd and somehow also so vivid that I laughed, and laughing broke something loose that had been stuck. What do I even say to him? I asked. Start with something true, Lucas said. That's very easy for you to say. You find him interesting. Tell him something interesting. You two apparently share a taste in literature. Start there. That's terrifying. Yes, Lucas agreed. That's generally how this works. Monday arrived. I had a plan. The plan was, next time I was in the library and Rick sat across from me, I was going to say something about the book I'd seen him reading. The one I'd read the previous summer. The one that required commitment and a certain kind of mind. The plan was calm, measured, and low risk. There was a plausible deniability built in. It was just a comment about a book. If I'd misread everything, it was just a comment about a book. If I hadn't misread everything. It was an opening. I was in advanced lit by 9:55 on Monday morning, which meant I was there before most of the class, which meant I watched people file in and take their seats. Which meant I watched the chair next to Rick Prince remain empty as people distributed themselves around the room. Rick Prince was already there, in the back row. He was looking at the front of the classroom. He did not look at me when I walked in. I stood in the middle of the classroom for 3 seconds, then I walked to the back row and sat down next to him, not because there weren't other seats available, there were still several. I walked to the back row and sat down next to him as a deliberate act. A conscious choice, and I was aware of the deliberateness of it in every part of my body. Rick Prince looked at me, just briefly. One quick look, and then he was looking at the front of the room again. But in that brief look I caught something, a shift, a flicker, a very small version of that expression he made when something interested him. I opened my notebook, I wrote the date. After a moment, without looking at me, Rick said, very quietly, "You're early." I agreed. A pause. "The Steinbeck essay," he said. Still quiet. Still not looking at me. "Calloway's going to assign the rewrite next week. Your argument was stronger than your evidence." I thought about this. He was right. I know. I got a bit ahead of myself in the third paragraph. The primary text citations were thin. I was more interested in the argument than the support. Arguments without support are just opinions. That's a very pragmatic view. It's a correct view. I almost smiled. "I'll make note of it." The bell rang. Mr. Calloway began to talk. We both turned our attention to the front of the class, but something had shifted. The air between us had changed, still careful, still precise, but with a different quality now. Less like standing near weather. More like standing near something that might, under specific circumstances, decide to be a conversation. I saw him in the library on Thursday. He was already at a table, not ours, a different table near the window, because apparently we didn't have a table, even though we had been sharing the same table for 3 weeks, and I stood in the library entrance for a moment, recalibrating, then I walked to the window table and sat down across from him. He looked up. The look was brief but present. "Hey," I said, which was an unpromising opening but the one I arrived at. "Hey," he said, which was something. He had said hey to me. Rick Prince had said hey. I put down my bag. I pulled out my books. I tried to remember that I had a plan, and the plan was the book. The plan was to say something about the book, and I should do the plan now. I took out my notebook. I opened it. I wrote nothing because my mind had decided this was an excellent moment to become entirely blank. Rick was writing something. After a minute, he pushed a piece of paper toward me across the table. I looked at it. It was a list of sources, the same ones I'd been trying to compile for a paper in my political theory class. Or very nearly the same, a few I hadn't found yet included. "How," I said, "you had the assignment sheet in your bag last week." I read it by accident. "By accident. You put your bag on the table when you sit down." The front pocket was open. I looked at him. He looked at the paper. There was a very precise quality to the way he was not meeting my eyes. I thought about what Lucas had said. He's saving seats for you. He found you a library book. He likes you. I thought about the thing I'd decided to say. I saw you reading something last month, I said. In the hallway. Outside the east wing, he went still in the way that large things go still. The quality of it was notable. A novel, I said. I recognized the cover. A pause. Did you? I read it last summer. In 3 days, the stillness shifted. 3 days, I couldn't stop. A beat. It was one of the best things I've read in years. Rick Prince looked at me then, actually looked at me, not the brief sidelong thing but a full direct look, and up close and with his attention fully on me. I understood why the junior had transferred schools. Not because there was anything hostile in it, but because being fully looked at by Rick Prince was an experience with density. It had weight. It felt like something that mattered. Being seen like that, and mattering has its own kind of gravity. It is. He said. One of the best. The ending, I said. Yes, he said. We had not named the book. We didn't need to. We both knew which ending we meant, the one that was devastatingly, perfectly inevitable, that you saw coming from 50 pages away and fell into anyway like a person stepping off a cliff they'd been standing on the edge of for hours. I didn't expect it to hit the way it did, I said honestly. It always does. A pause. The second read is different. You've read it twice, 3 times. He said it matter-of-factly, like reading a book 3 times was a reasonable thing he'd done, not a confession. It's a different book depending on what you're looking for. What were you looking for the 3rd time? The question came out before I decided to ask it, and I felt the air compact slightly between us, that library quiet pressing in. He didn't answer for a moment. He looked at his notebook. Honestly, he said, very quietly, I'm still trying to figure that out. I thought about that for a moment. Me too, I said. About a lot of things. Lately, the silence that followed had a different texture than the silences I'd experienced near him before. This one was lighter. Occupied differently. Rick Prince looked at me again, and this time the expression I'd catalogued, the softening of the frown, the thing that happened when something interested him, was unmistakable. You sat in my row today, he said. In Calloway's, I did. You had other options. I did, I agreed. He held my gaze. Why? It was the most direct question anyone had ever asked me with the fewest syllables, and it deserved a direct answer. Because, I said, I've been sitting in the wrong seat for the past few weeks. Another silence. A long one. I didn't rush it. Yeah, Rick said finally. Just that. A low quiet single syllable that had a whole architecture of things inside it. Yeah, I said back. We sat across from each other in the library by the window, and outside the window it was November and cold and gray, and inside it was warm and quiet, and I had the feeling, irrational, premature, strangely certain, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Things were different after the library, not dramatically different. There was no announcement, no sudden rearrangement of the social geography of Westbrook Academy, no moment where Rick Prince stood up in the cafeteria and proclaimed anything. It was more subtle than that. Small increments. Degrees of shift. He started talking to me in class. Not much, it was still advanced lit, and Mr. Calloway ran a focused classroom, but brief, specific exchanges in the 2 minutes before the bell. A comment about the reading. An observation about something Calloway had said last time. Once, an unprompted remark about an article he'd read that was relevant to a discussion we'd had. And I realized he'd thought about the discussion after class, possibly in the same way I'd been turning over things he said long after the moment had passed. The library sessions became more regular. We both just started showing up there on Thursdays, and then also Tuesdays, and then a Wednesday appeared in there somewhere without either of us explicitly arranging it. We worked on different things most of the time, but there was a conversation running alongside the work, interrupted, resumed, built over sessions the way you build something from a material that takes a while to set. I learned things about him that confirmed and complicated and expanded the picture I'd been building. He was the kind of reader who annotated. Margins full of small precise writing, not just underlining but actual responses, arguments with the text, questions addressed directly to the author. He'd let me look at his copy of a book once, and I'd spent 10 minutes reading his marginalia and feeling, obscurely, like I was reading a second book hidden inside the first one. He'd grown up moving a lot, which explained certain things, the self-sufficiency, the way he took up space without needing to make claims on it, the sense of someone who had learned to be their own company. He didn't say this directly, but it came out in fragments over weeks, the way things do when you're not trying to tell someone something but you're talking enough that things surface on their own. He was funny, which had been entirely invisible to me before and was something I suspect most people didn't know. Not funny in the way that performs for an audience, a sharp, dry, precisely timed thing, observations with a twist, and he delivered them in that same quiet tone with the same not quite expression and then went back to whatever he'd been doing, leaving me with the laugh that had caught me by surprise. I told Lucas about the funny thing. Lucas said, "Oh no, what? You've got that voice." "What voice?" "The voice you get when you're deeply interested in something and trying not to show it. You had it when you discovered that podcasts about obscure historical events existed. You had it when you got your first really good grade in Latin. You have it right now." I did not confirm or deny this. "Brendan," Lucas said, with great fondness and a little bit of pity. "You're in trouble." "I know," I said. "Good trouble or bad trouble." I thought about Rick Prince's marginalia. His laugh, the almost silent version that I'd heard once, the first time I'd made a joke that landed. The way he'd said "yeah" in the library. "Good, I think," I said. "Terrifying, but good," Lucas nodded. "Those are usually the same thing." It was December when he walked with me, not a big thing. We were both leaving school at the same time, a Friday afternoon, end of the week. The light already low and orange in the way it gets in December when the sun gives up early, and we fell into step without discussing it and walked out together. We went the long way, which was my way, past the fish tank outside Dr. Patel's classroom. Rick glanced at the tank. Then at me. "You always go this way." "I like the fish." He looked at the tank for a moment. "The blue one, yeah. He's very assertive, he runs the whole tank, completely." Dr. Patel named him Senator. Rick's mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "That tracks." We walked out into the cold, and the cold was the particular sharp clean cold of early December, and we walked for a while in the comfortable kind of quiet that I had apparently developed with Rick Prince without entirely noticing it happening. "The rewrite is due Monday," I said. "The Steinbeck one, did you fix the evidence problem?" "I spent 4 hours on it Thursday." "I think it's better," or right, both, maybe. "You can read it if you want." A pause. "Yeah." "Okay." We'd reached the point where our routes home diverged. He went left, I went right, which was a fact I had established through a process of observation that I was not going to explain to anyone. We stopped. We looked at each other. "See you Monday," he said. "Yeah," I said. "See you Monday." He went left. I went right. I'd gone about 20 feet when I heard him say, behind me, "Brendan." I turned. He was standing where we'd parted. His bag over his shoulder. The December light behind him. "The essay's going to be good," he said. "Your arguments always are." Then he turned and walked away. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold December air, feeling something warm spreading through the center of my chest, and I thought, okay. Yeah. Good trouble. The thing about quiet accumulations is that they eventually reach a threshold. We had been accumulating quietly for 3 months by the time December became January. The library sessions. The before-class exchanges. The walking out together on Fridays, which had become a pattern without being declared. The texts that had started happening, practical at first, about books and assignments, and then less practical, more like the continuation of a conversation that had no particular subject, just the ongoing fact of two people finding things to say to each other. He texted me about the article. I texted him about the book I was reading. He sent me a single line about something absurd that had happened in his morning class, and I laughed for 2 minutes at my kitchen table while eating breakfast. Lucas watched all of this with the air of a person waiting for a conclusion that was visibly approaching. you should just tell him, Lucas said, in late January, when we were sitting in the cafeteria and I was looking at a text from Rick about a book recommendation that I had read 4 times to make sure I was reading the tone correctly. Tell him what, I said. I knew what, I know what you're going to say, good. That saves time. Do it, it's more complicated than that, it isn't. What if I've misread everything? Lucas took a measured breath. He was very patient with me, as a rule, and I was aware that this patience was being tested. Let me summarize. He said. He has been saving a seat for you in class for 4 months. He has engineered encounters with you in the hallway. He found you library resources. He learns your assignment sheets by reading them while you're unaware. He walks out of school with you every Friday without fail. He texts you daily. He has read the same novel 3 times and told you he's still trying to figure out what he's looking for. Lucas looked at me steadily. Brendan. What are you waiting for? I thought about the question seriously. The honest answer was that I was waiting for certainty, which was something I had always required before large decisions. I was waiting for the moment when I couldn't possibly be wrong. Which was a strategy that guaranteed never doing anything, because certainty of this kind did not exist. You could have evidence, you could have patterns, you could have a look in a library on a November afternoon that had settled into your memory and stayed there, but certainty was a story you told yourself afterward, not something you got in advance. I'm scared, I said honestly. Lucas nodded. This he accepted. Of what, specifically? That it changes things. It will change things, I mean, in the wrong direction. What's the right direction? I thought about Rick walking left while I walked right. About the way he'd turn back to say the essay would be good. About 3 months of careful, accumulating presence. I don't know, I said. I haven't been there yet. Lucas was quiet for a moment. You know what I think, he said. I know, I think the thing you're scared of has already happened. You're just waiting for the paperwork. I looked at him, he shrugged. The feelings are already there. All you're debating is whether to acknowledge them. And I think you already know what he'll say. I did, maybe. The knowing lived in a careful, protected part of my chest that I'd been not examining for months because examining it meant doing something about it. I picked up my phone. I put it down. I picked it up again. I texted Rick, are you going to be in the library tomorrow? The response came back within 2 minutes. Yeah. You. Yeah. There's something I want to say to you. A slightly longer pause. Okay, he texted back, just that. But something in the brevity of it felt like permission. I was there early. The library on a Saturday morning was quiet in a different way than during the week, less industrious, more settled, the kind of quiet that you could hear. I found our table, the window one. It was ours now, definitely ours, and I sat down and I waited. He was 7 minutes late, which was unlike him, and when he walked in he looked slightly different. Not in any major visible way. But I'd spent enough time observing him to notice minor deviations. And there was something slightly less composed in him this morning, not uncertainty, exactly, but a controlled attention, like someone listening very hard to a sound they might be imagining. He sat down across from me. He put down his bag. We looked at each other. Hey, I said. Hey, he said. I had prepared something. I had spent the previous evening organizing my thoughts into clear, communicable sequence, the way I organized arguments for essays, evidence first and conclusion to follow. In practice, the organized sequence had entirely vacated my mind and I was left with the unorganized version, which was just the truth, which was simpler. I've been sitting next to you in class on purpose. I said. Since November. And showing up to the library on the days I thought you'd be here. And going the long way out of school on Fridays. Rick Prince looked at me. The full direct look that had weight. I know, he said, I know you know. I'm just saying it directly, okay, because I took a breath. I think you've been doing similar things. And I think we've been doing this thing where we both know but neither of us says it, and I'm tired of that. I'd rather just, I stopped. Restarted. I like talking to you. I like being near you. I've liked it for months and I keep finding more things to like, which is, a pause. Which is the most consistently interesting thing that's happened to me in a long time. And I wanted to say that clearly, instead of just, I gestured vaguely at the air between us. All of this, silence. Rick Prince sat across from me in the Saturday morning library and the light came through the window at a low January angle, and he was looking at me with that expression, the one I'd catalogued and spent 3 months trying not to read too much into, and it was clearer now than it had ever been. The seat, he said. In Callaway's, yeah, I told people it was taken. I went very still. You told them, I said it was taken. He looked at the table. When they tried to sit there. I said it was saved, Rick, I know. He looked up. I know how that sounds. It sounds like, I know what it sounds like. A pause. It's accurate, I looked at him. For how long? Since the second week, the second week. He had been saving that chair since the second week of the school year, which was approximately 1 week after I'd sat in it by accident, which was approximately 1 week after we had met, and he had been doing it without ever once indicating that he was doing it, and it was the most extraordinary and also most characteristic thing I could imagine him doing. You never said anything, I said. No, why? He was quiet for a moment. In the quiet I heard the library around us, a distant sound from somewhere in the stacks. The heating system, the particular hush of books. I didn't know what to say, he said. I don't. A pause. A careful pause, the kind where words are being selected from a difficult inventory. I'm not good at this. Saying things. I'm better at, another pause, doing things, I said softly. He looked at me. I know, I said. I noticed, something in him shifted, the last of that controlled tension, the listening hard quality. What replaced it was simpler. Yeah, he said. I like you. I have for a while. I didn't know how to, I know, and you were. He stopped. I know, I said again. I was doing the same thing. We sat with that for a moment. So, I said. So, he said, I'm telling you directly, I'd like to do this properly. Actually properly, not the thing where we just keep being near each other until we're 90. The corner of his mouth moved. The almost smile. Properly how? Coffee, maybe. There's a place on Marsh Street that's better than Pete's Cart, which is a strong claim but I stand by it. When, tomorrow, if you want. Yeah, he said. Tomorrow, I exhaled. Something large unwound in my chest. Okay. Tomorrow. Rick Prince looked at me with that full, weighted, particular attention, and the light was still coming through the window, and we were sitting at our table in the library, and I thought, 3 months of all of this. 3 months of chairs and books and long ways out of school. What a long, careful, extraordinary road to a yes. For what it's worth, he said, the seat's been yours the whole time. I felt warmth move through me like the sun moving out from behind something. I know, I said. I just had to figure out how to sit in it. Coffee the next day was at the place on Marsh Street, and it was as good as I'd claimed, and we sat across from each other in a small corner table for 2.5 hours and talked, really talked, the kind of conversation that starts in one place and ends somewhere completely different and you can't quite retrace the route. He told me about the moving. The 14 different homes by the time he was 16, which was why he was the way he was with space, particular about it, precise about what was his and what he claimed. You can't attach to places when they keep changing, he said. So you stopped trying, but you kept the books, I said. He looked at me. Yeah, books are portable, yeah. A pause. People aren't always. I thought about this. Is that, I stopped, reconfigured. Is that why you don't, why you take a long time to say things? The almost smile again, a little more visible now that I was looking for it. Yeah. Probably. By the time I figure out if someone's staying, the moment's usually passed. How do you figure out if someone's staying? He looked at me steadily. They come back. I thought about the chair. About the Thursday library sessions. About the long way out of school, showing up, I said. Yeah, I kept showing up, I said. Yeah, he said. You did. Something settled between us, warm and clear and solid, like something that had been uncertain becoming certain, like finding your footing on ground you'd been testing. I'll keep showing up, I said. It was simpler than everything else I could have said, and sometimes simple is the truest thing. Rick Prince looked at me across a table in a coffee shop on a Sunday in January, and the expression on his face was the one I'd first noticed in class 3 months ago. The one I'd spent time cataloging and analyzing from a careful distance, and now I was close enough to read it clearly, and what it said was, yes. That. Exactly that. Good, he said. Lucas texted me that evening. Well, I thought about how to summarize 2.5 hours of the best conversation I'd had in recent memory, and a walk after that, and the moment at the end of the walk when he'd said, "See you tomorrow," with a quiet certainty that wasn't really about seeing me tomorrow so much as about everything that came after that. Good, I texted back. Just good? I smiled at my phone in the dark of my room. The best kind of good, I typed. The terrifying kind. Lucas sent back a series of emojis that communicated several positive emotions in sequence. Then, "I told you so, for the record, yes you did, I'm glad you did something about it, me too." He really saved the seat for 2 months without saying anything. "For months, Brendan, I know, for months, I know, that's the most intense thing I've ever heard." I put the phone down. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about a Tuesday in October when I was late to advanced lit and there was only one seat available and I sat in it because there was nothing else to do, and the entire subsequent trajectory of things that followed from that one accidental choice. Funny, how things happen. How you end up exactly where you're supposed to be, not because you planned it but because you kept taking the next small step, and the next one, until the steps accumulated into something you could call a direction. A path. Something with a beginning you could trace. Looking back, I fell asleep thinking about coffee and book margins and dark eyes and a chair in the back row of advanced lit that had been waiting for me since September. It's strange, looking back, how quietly the things that change you happen. There wasn't a moment, not a single trumpet blast, neon sign moment, where Rick and I became something. It was more like the library. Like all those Thursday afternoon sessions that weren't quite planned but happened anyway. Accumulating until they were a thing you could name. We were in Calloway's class, and then we were in the library, and then we were walking out of school on Fridays, and then we were at the coffee shop on Marsh Street, and then we were just, together. In the specific way that, together, means when you've arrived at it carefully, when you've built it slowly out of observations and small true things and a lot of time spent in each other's presence. The school noticed, because schools notice things. The shift in the social architecture of Westbrook Academy that Rick Prince sat next to Brendan Hall in advanced lit and they left school together and sometimes appeared at the library window table. Working in companionable quiet. People had theories. Lucas heard some of them and reported back with amusement, because Lucas was that kind of friend. Rick didn't comment on the noticing. He existed in the general awareness of others with the same calm self-possession he brought to everything, which was to say he didn't give it much real estate in his mind. I was less practiced at this but learning. We had an argument in February, a real one, about something that had been compressing for a while, a miscommunication that had expanded in the silence around it, the way those things do. It was uncomfortable in the specific way that arguments with people you care about are uncomfortable. Where the discomfort isn't just about the disagreement but about the fact that you care, that it matters, that the stakes are real. Rick wasn't good at the middle of arguments. He went quiet and compact, like a structure bracing against weather, and the quiet was easy to read as withdrawal when it was actually something different, when it was actually processing, the way he processed everything, carefully and at his own pace. I'd learned this about him. It didn't stop me from misreading it in the moment, but I'd learned it. We sorted it out over 2 days, not fast, but completely. Afterward he said, "I don't do well with things that feel like they're ending. Is that what you thought was happening?" A long pause. "I don't know. I didn't want it to be, it wasn't, I know that now, you could have said something, yeah." He looked at me. "I'm working on that," and that was the thing, he was working on it. Not performing the effort of working on it but actually doing the work, in the specific Rick Prince way, which was quietly and with no announcement and demonstrably. The checking in that started happening. The things he said that he previously would have kept inside that quiet interior of his. The way he'd sometimes stop in a moment and say something that I knew had cost him something to say, and the knowledge of what it cost made the saying of it land differently. I was working on things too. The assumption that waiting was safer than acting. The fear of misreading that had made me miss things for months. I was faster to say true things now, less likely to present the indirect version of something because the direct version felt vulnerable. It was a process. It was ongoing. It was, good, spring came, the way it does, suddenly and all at once, after a winter that seemed like it would last indefinitely. The light changed. The air changed. The fish tank outside Dr. Patel's classroom got a new occupant, a small green fish that Senator immediately subordinated to his authority. Rick and I were standing outside the tank after school one afternoon. Watching Senator hold court, he added a fish, Rick observed. Dr. Patel mentioned getting him company. Senator apparently disagreed. Evidently, I leaned back against the wall next to him. We were close in the way that we were close now, easy, familiar, a comfort that had developed over months of time spent together. His shoulder was near my shoulder. I've been thinking, I said, about what, that Tuesday in October. When I was late, he looked at me sideways. If I'd been on time, I said. If Ms. Ferreira hadn't needed help with those books, I'd have taken a different seat and sat next to Sophia and probably never, I trailed off, never what, never any of this. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the seat would have been there the next week, would it, or the week after? A pause. However long it took, I turned to look at him. He was looking at Senator through the glass with that private expression. You would have just kept waiting, I said, probably. He glanced at me. I'm patient, I laughed, the real laugh, not the careful one. He made a sound that was almost his laugh, the almost silent one I'd first heard months ago and still considered one of my better achievements. Good thing I was late, I said. Yeah, he said. Good thing. The next school year started on a Thursday. I walked into advanced literature. We'd both signed up again. Different year, different syllabus but same room, same time slot, different teacher, and I was the first one there. I dropped my bag on the back row, the window side, and took the second seat from the end, and I waited. Students filed in. The room filled. People took seats, settled, pulled out notebooks. The chair next to me stayed empty. I didn't look at the door. I didn't time it. I just sat with my notebook open and my pen in my hand and I waited, the way he had once waited for me, for however long it took. The bell rang. Someone sat down next to me. You're early, Rick said. I know. I glanced at him. Saved you a seat. He looked at the chair. Then at me. That expression, the soft version of the frown, the one reserved for things that interested him, was fully visible now. I didn't have to search for it anymore. Yeah, he said. I noticed. The teacher called the class to order. We both turned to the front, but under the desk, his hand found mine and stayed there, and I thought, this is what it looks like when two people who are bad at saying things finally say them. Not in a single moment but in the long accumulation of showing up. Of coming back. Of saving the seat and eventually, finally, sitting in it. The class began. We stayed.